Hey there, just a heads up, this episode of the Judo Science Podcast was created with help from AI. Some of the voices you'll hear are synthetic, but the ideas come from real research and real judo.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the show built to take your stack of research, your articles, your data, and turn it into instant expertise. Today, we are focusing on probably the ultimate biological adaptation machine, the human heart. Our mission is really specific. We're diving deep into the cardiovascular adaptations of elite judo athletes.
Yeah.
Judo is a sport with a truly unique physical profile. It demands explosive power, sustained grip strength, but also surprisingly high levels of fitness. We need to unpack what happens to their hearts, a phenomenon known as the athlete's heart.
And this isn't a new idea, though our understanding of it is always evolving. The term athlete's heart is just a label for the set of cardiovascular changes that come from long-term intense conditioning.
Right.
It was first noted way back in 1899, studying changes in, of all things, highly conditioned Swedish skiers.
Wow.
Physiologically, when we talk about the athlete's heart, we are mostly looking at the left ventricle.
The main pumping chamber.
Exactly, the main pump. To handle the increased workload, it typically responds by increasing its size, thickening its muscular walls, and gaining more mass overall.
But the key here is that it's a good thing, right?
It's a crucial distinction. In a healthy, highly trained athlete, this is a benign physiological variation. It's normal for them, and it carries an excellent prognosis.
Okay, so let's set up the core conflict that makes judo so interesting. For decades, the thinking in sports cardiology was, it was kind of dominated by the Morgenroth hypothesis, which suggested a clear, simple split between how different types of exercise remodel the heart.
Right.
The idea was if you do sustained high-intensity static exercise, think heavy weightlifting, rock climbing, you're clamping down on your blood vessels, this creates a massive pressure overload.
And the heart fights that pressure.
Right. It combats the pressure by thickening its walls. We call that concentric hypertrophy.
Conversely, if you do dynamic endurance exercise, like running a marathon or swimming, you get a huge volume overload.
So more blood flowing through.
Exactly. The heart has to pump much more blood per beat, so it stretches. The chamber itself dilates, and that's called eccentric hypertrophy.
So pressure load leads to thickness. Volume load leads to stretch. Simple enough. Now, where on earth does a sport like judo fit?
It's the perfect question.
It requires that sustained maximal strength for grips and throws. That's high static. But a match is continuous, explosive. It demands high intermittent endurance. That sounds like volume. It's a total mix.
And that mixed demand is exactly why these studies are so valuable. Our sources detail the physical demands of judo as having a high static component. We're talking more than 50% of an athlete's maximal voluntary contraction.
Okay.
But, and this is the interesting part, it's coupled with what's clinically estimated as a low dynamic component, less than 40% of maximal oxygen uptake.
So on paper, it looks like a strength sport.
On paper, yes. But the physiological stress creates this complexity. The strength training induces those big, sudden pressure overloads that should lead to concentric thickening.
But then you have the reality of a match.
Exactly. The intermittent, explosive, high-volume demand of moving a resisting opponent again and again for several minutes, that pushes volume. Judo basically asks the heart to do both kinds of adaptation at the same time.
Which makes it a real challenge to classify.
And to interpret in a clinical setting, absolutely.
So to explore this, we're going to start not with your typical cohort, but with a unique and fascinating population, Brazilian Paralympic judo athletes. This one focused on 14 visually handicapped Paralympic judo athletes. They were around 26 years old and had been training intensely for about 9 years on average.
And previous research on disabled athletes had shown, a bit of a mixed picture. Signs of athletes' heart were found in maybe 51% of cases, sometimes alongside high coronary risk factors.
Okay, so it wasn't a given.
Not at all. But the finding in this specific judo cohort was, it was absolutely striking. That physiological remodeling we're talking about were found in 100% of the visually handicapped judo athletes they studied.
100%.
100%. It suggests that the consistent, intense, specific training load of judo creates such a potent adaptation that it overcomes pretty much any other factor in this group.
And they confirmed this with hard data.
Oh, yeah. Through echocardiograms and ECGs, they noted several classic signs. 9 of the athletes showed increased left ventricular volume, 5 had left ventricular hypertrophy thicker muscle, and 3 had sinus bradycardia.
Which is that classic slow resting heart rate.
The hallmark of excellent conditioning.
And what really stood out to me from the sources about this group was their actual fitness level. I mean, despite judo being classified as this high-static sport, their estimated peak oxygen uptake,
Yeah.
it was excellent.
That was incredibly high.
Around 62.7 milliliters of oxygen per minute.
Yeah, for context, a VO2 max of 62 is what you'd see in a serious amateur cyclist or a top recreational marathon runner.
So that's elite aerobic performance coming from what's supposed to be a strength sport.
Right. It immediately tells you there has to be a heavy volume component driving that adaptation.
Which leads right to the correlation they found.
It does. They demonstrated a very, very strong correlation, an R value of 0.91 between the left ventricular mass indexed to body surface and their endurance time.
And an R value that high mean what exactly?
It means they move together almost perfectly. As training endurance went up, the heart mass went up nearly 1-for-1. It's a direct, powerful relationship between the functional demands and the structural changes in the heart.
That's a perfect bridge to our next section then, which looks at elite, non-disabled male judokas versus non-athletes.
A small but very highly trained group. 10 elite male judokas, average age about 25 and a half.
And the differences were big.
Massive. The judokas had substantially higher left ventricular mass, the absolute weight of the heart muscle. We're talking an average of 233 grams compared to 137 in the controls.
Almost double.
It's a huge difference. Their LVM index, which adjusts for body size, was also significantly higher.
And the inside of the heart, the chamber itself.
Much larger internal dimensions. The LVEDD, that's the diameter when the heart is full of blood, was significantly higher. The average was 55.2 millimeters, but the range went all the way up to 62.
Okay, and this is where the data just blows up that traditional hypothesis we started with.
This is the key finding.
When they classified the heart geometry of these men, they used a measure called relative wall thickness, or RWT.
Which basically tells you if the thickening is balanced with the stretching.
And what they found was astonishing. Most of these guys, 6 out of the 10, showed eccentric hypertrophy. Wait a minute. If judo is high static, high strength, why are we seeing the endurance pattern? What is tipping the scales so heavily toward a volume adaptation?
That is the significant finding. It completely contradicts what you'd expect from a classic static sport.
So what's happening?
What's happening is that the high-intensity but intermittent nature of competitive judo, the rapid changes between maximal strength, explosive movement, short recoveries, it functionally acts like a major volume load.
Almost like interval training.
A very intense form of interval training, yes. The body demands massive oxygen delivery during those repeated bursts, and that demand causes the chamber to stretch. The training signature of elite judo ends up mimicking an endurance sport enough to drive that eccentric volume-based adaptation.
And crucially, it was a healthy adaptation.
Completely. Their function was totally preserved. Both systolic function, the ejection fraction, and diastolic function, how the heart relaxes, were perfectly normal in everyone. It was adaptation, not disease.
This complex pattern in men leads us right to the female cohort. So what did they find in elite female judokas?
Right, 9 athletes versus 9 controls. And again, the key comparison was size and volume. The female judokas showed significantly increased LV cavity dimensions and volumes compared to the non-athletes.
How much bigger?
Well, for instance, their end diastolic volume index was substantially higher, about 70 milliliters per meter squared versus 49 in the controls. A big jump.
So a lot more volume.
A lot more. This translated into a really high prevalence of enlargement. Almost 89% of the female judokas had abnormally increased volumes compared to the controls.
But again, staying within safe physiological limits.
Oh, yes. Well, within the limits, that would suggest a problem.
But the geometry classification itself, that tells a really different, fascinating story compared to the men.
It does. While they had increased heart mass and wall thickness compared to non-athletes, the majority of the female judokas, over 77%, exhibited normal left ventricular geometry.
Normal geometry. So only a minority showed that eccentric hypertrophy we saw in the men.
Exactly. Only about 22% did. And this is the crucial finding about the gender difference. The adaptation in elite female judokas leans strongly toward chamber dilatation, the volume increase. but without the same degree of pronounced wall hypertrophy seen in men.
So their relative wall thickness stays in the normal range.
It does. It distinguishes them from that classic male eccentric pattern. It really emphasizes that sex is a major factor in how the heart remodels, even under the exact same training load.
And the direct comparison study between the men and women really highlights the absolute differences.
Yes, the source data shows that clear scale difference you'd expect. The men had significantly higher left ventricular mass, 233 grams versus 164 for the women. Wall thickness was also greater in males.
But that geometric ratio, the RWT,
Interestingly, it didn't differ significantly between the sexes, which supports the finding that females tend to maintain a more normal geometric look even as the heart gets bigger.
so all of this data leads us to the most critical part, the clinical application.
Absolutely. This is where it gets really important. The number one challenge for any physician examining an athlete is reliably telling the difference between this benign physiological athlete's heart and life-threatening conditions.
Like hypertrophic cardiomyopathy.
Exactly, HCM, or dilated cardiomyopathy, DCM. These diseases are major causes of sudden cardiac death in young athletes.
And that's where all these specific measurements become so essential. Knowing what a healthy adapted judo heart looks like is the key.
It is, and the studies confirm that the absolute physiological marker separating adaptation from disease is the preservation of function.
So the pump still works perfectly.
Precisely. In both the male and female studies, the cardiac enlargement was always accompanied by preserved systolic function, a normal ejection fraction or pumping efficiency, and normal diastolic filling patterns. That preservation of function is the all-clear signal. It's adaptation, not failure.
And those specific upper limit numbers we saw, like the male LVED of up to 62 millimeters, that's invaluable reference data for doctors.
It's critical. Without this specific data for judo athletes, a physician might see a 62-millimeter chamber and mistakenly disqualify a perfectly healthy elite athlete.
So it's clear the classification is way more nuanced than that old static versus dynamic idea.
Far more. In elite judo, we see this potent, mixed response. Eccentric hypertrophy is dominant in males, while chamber dilatation with normal geometry is the pattern in females. The final call rests not on size alone, but on structure, geometry, and preserved function.
So to wrap up the main findings for you today, elite judo training causes a powerful mixed cardiac adaptation. You get physiological enlargement and increased mass, but critically the heart's pumping and relaxation functions stay completely healthy. And the pattern is complex, it's highly sex-dependent. Males show that classic eccentric hypertrophy, while females lean toward chamber dilatation, all while keeping a more visually normal geometric appearance.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to chew on. We know cardiac remodeling is highly complex, and while echocardiography gave us this essential data, nuclear magnetic resonance, or MRI, is really the gold standard now.
Right, for seeing structure in high detail.
Exactly, for precisely assessing heart structure, for detecting subtle things like scar tissue or fibrosis. So the question is, what might future long-term studies using MRI reveal about the true upper limits, and maybe more importantly, the long-term durability of this mixed hypertrophy pattern in judo athletes decades after their competitive careers have ended?
That long-term data on durability, that could be the final crucial piece of the puzzle. A fascinating area to explore. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.
Next time on the Judo Science Podcast, episode 29, Strength and Conditioning Recap. What we've learned so far, episodes 20 to 28,